G'day and welcome to Pellowe Talk. On tonight's episode, we have Senator Malcolm Roberts, Bernard Gaynor, Marcus Fu, and James Macpherson. So let's start by introducing them. First of all, we have Senator Malcolm Roberts. His Twitter bio says he's the Senator for Queensland with Pauline Hanson's One Nation, and he is responsible for or part of the Royal Commission into the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. We also have Bernard Gaynor, and his bio doesn't say a whole lot, but maybe it does due to ongoing lawfare against him by LGBTIQAX plus activists. This account may soon shut down, and we'll have more about that very soon. We also have Marcus Fu with us tonight. He describes himself as a young conservative, a monarchist, a writer, interested in opera, history, and temple, a Thatcherite, and we'll have to ask him what a WCE fan is, a dog lover, Liberal Australia supporter, and proud member of the IPA. And if we can get his internet connection nice and stable, we have one of my favourite regulars, James Macpherson, who offers musings on culture, and is a columnist for Spectator and Cauldron Pool with a strong journalism background. Welcome to this evening's show, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. I'll just unmute you all. It's great to have you with us. How are you, Senator Malcolm Roberts?
I'm very well, thanks, Dave. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to it.
It is going to be great. And Marcus, we've never chatted before this live connection, but frequently on Twitter, bumping into each other and finding out we're sometimes on the same side of an issue.
Yeah. Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. I was not expecting this.
You're most welcome, and it's also nice to have a representative from the western side of the nation.
Yeah.
And Bernard, if you're a regular watcher of Pellowe Talk, you've seen a couple of interviews that I've done with Bernie live, and we've also done some live events together for various organisations. But Bernard Gaynor is a proud ex-member of the Australian Defence Force, a war veteran deployed to Iraq as an officer with military intelligence, and has served our nation proudly, and that's a part of a proud family tradition. But he continues fighting for Australian freedom here at home in domestic battles, best described as lawfare. So thank you for your service. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last time I say it, Bernie, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you very much, Dave. It's great to be on again with you.
And perhaps, Dave, if I could also say thank you to Bernie, I have in the past, but thank you for your service overseas, and especially your service in Australia, mate. What you're doing to protect freedom in this country, to bring it back, is very much appreciated from a lot of people. So thank you. Your courage is really outstanding.
Brilliant.
Oh, thank you very much for that too, Malcolm.
And joining us now is also James Macpherson. So he's got a very pixelated picture. We're going to have to work on the NBN in his neck of the woods. Apparently, Sydney doesn't have enough population for Malcolm Turnbull's NBN that we had to have. But we'll work on getting maybe a pedal power radio to you or something, James. Can we hear you okay?
Some say I look a lot better pixelated.
That's right. So that's very true. Well, look, let's move to the first issue of tonight. And Bernard, I actually would like to chat about the article you wrote about someone else. Well, sort of about someone else. And that is Mark Latham's bill to end the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board's reign of terror. And for a little bit of background for the viewers, the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board has received complaints many times against Bernard Gaynor, even though he doesn't have any part of their jurisdiction. He doesn't live in New South Wales, and the complaints were not carried out. The activities for which they received complaints were not carried out in New South Wales. This went all the way to the High Court of Australia, the highest authority in the land, and they agreed with Bernard. New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board, you have no jurisdiction over a resident of Queensland for activities that were conducted in Queensland. And so the New South Wales government quickly changed the laws, and the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Tribunal Board continued pursuing Bernard Gaynor. Bernard, if I got any details of that wrong, please correct the summary, and then head into why Mark Latham's bill is so important.
Sure. Well, there's a little bit that's not correct there, but it's very complicated legal issues relating to the Constitution and jurisdictional issues. So I won't delve into them too much, but I will just point out that if the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board has time to spend suing people who live outside of New South Wales, then I think it's fair to say that they don't actually have any real work to do at all. Which is why it is so important that Mark Latham brought this bill into Parliament in New South Wales, because it will protect people living outside New South Wales from this organisation of thought police. And basically, since around the year 2000, it has allowed a single man to lodge hundreds and hundreds of complaints. This man describes it as his work to lodge complaints.
Wow.
He says he's an anti-free speech activist. He's lodged 37 complaints against me. He's lodged almost 100 complaints against a man by the name of John Sunol, who lives in Newcastle. He has brain damage. He is severely handicapped. You would think that the Anti-Discrimination Act in New South Wales should protect someone like John Sunol, but it's actually been used as a weapon to destroy this man. He has basically had no legal representation for most of the time. He's been dragged to the tribunal. He's been ordered to pay, I think, over $50,000 now to this activist. He's bankrupt. They're now trying to go after, I understand, the compensation he received from the car accident, which led to his brain injury. And it's really just a terrible, terrible scandal.
Yeah.
The New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Board have allowed this activist to lodge complaint after complaint, even though he boasts that he is lodging complaints to bankrupt people. He boasts that he's lodging complaints and making people's lives difficult so that they'll be forced into financial settlements with him. And it is a form of rainbow legal extortion. And it's time that it was stopped.
Malcolm, your thoughts on the fact that this is still going on after the High Court gave a determination that a New South Wales parajudicial organisation like the Anti-Discrimination Board can't pursue people outside of its jurisdiction. And I'll add into your comments. Can you explain?
Sorry, Dave, I might just jump in just to clarify. The High Court ruled that the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal did not have the power to hear complaints against residents of different states. So that's not the Anti-Discrimination Board? No, the Anti-Discrimination Board is the bureaucratic thought police that sits below it, that handles complaints and then refers them to the tribunal. Okay, so has the High Court instruction been ignored or pivoted around in some way, Bernard? Well, I would argue yes. I'm having an argument with the New South Wales Attorney General about that at the moment, and he would say no, and we're probably headed back to the High Court again because they changed the law after the High Court hearing in a way that I say still allows the tribunal to exercise jurisdiction. Malcolm, is this proof that we need the Anti-Discrimination Bill Draft 2, maybe with some further changes, Draft 3? Or is the real solution the defanging of these various state anti-discrimination boards and tribunals?
That is the real solution, Dave. It's a matter of getting rid of these stupid organizations, these pointless and productivity destroying organizations, civilization destroying organizations. That's quite clear. You know, there is another aspect to this too, and that is that the fact that these people are trying to control people like Bernie, trying to control the man who's had brain damage from a car accident. They're trying to control.
Yep.
Always beneath control, always there is fear. They fear Bernie. They fear people speaking out and standing up. And for that man, what's his name again, Bernie? The New South Wales?
John Sunol.
No, the man who's taking these complaints against you.
Gary Burns is his name.
Yeah, Gary Burns. You know, it's quite clear because he's admitted that he doesn't like freedom of speech and that he fights freedom of speech. So I wonder who decides who will be speaking in his little world, in his bubble, because free speech is absolutely essential to freedom of human progress. It's the first of my 8 keys to human progress. And free speech is the one that control freaks go after because all they want to do is control. I mean, they're just trying to shut Bernie down, that's all. And they're trying to shut everyone down who differs from them. That's the way it looks to me.
Yep. Marcus, what do you think is the right balance? The tension, do you think we need some positive rights enshrined in the Constitution, such as, or just legislation, not necessarily Constitution, but there's discussion about a Bill of Rights, but at the moment we're looking at the Religious Discrimination Bill to try and defang some of the weaponization of legalizing or undefining marriage in legislation. Do you think that positive legislation is the way to go, or do you think, as Mark Latham is trying to do with New South Wales, that we actually need to have less power in these state tribunals?
I think we definitely have to have a massive overhaul of these bodies. I think we live in Australia where it's a Western liberal democratic nation, yet we have these arrogant state bodies that are going after somebody who doesn't even live in their jurisdiction. And we have a liberal government, and you kind of have to ask, well, what is the very government doing? You know, this should be removed. I'm concerned about the religious discrimination bill. Because in the first early years of Australian politics, I really didn't like Tim Soot and Gillian Triggs and the arrogant way they ran about running the Australian Human Rights Commission. And I just look at it and I just go, well, you know, we have freedoms. We always celebrate these freedoms. We go, a soldiers die for the freedoms. Well, then we have these bodies and these bureaucrats who are paid so much money to go after people, destroy them. There's so many cases of these bodies going after people and destroying them. We need to dismantle and get rid of these bodies. Just get rid of it. Don't even create anymore. This is just, it's insane. And I sadly don't know much about this. I know Bernard has gone through courts and the courts to the higher court, and it's just, well, you know, he's a soldier. He's been through so many fights. I applaud him on his bravery, but if they can do that to him, they can do it to just about anybody, you know?
Yeah.
And it's terrible.
Lovely comment here from Grady, who says, sorry, Marcus. Lovely comment here from Grady, who says, Malcolm, I owe you an apology. You're far more than I've ever given you credit for and am thoroughly impressed. So just a note that gratuitous niceness will be welcome, and all comments that are beneath the bar of civility are not. So we would love to have your comments and questions, and we'll try and put them all on screen, or as many as contribute to the conversation, and would love your questions if we can keep them on track. So we'd love to invite you, the viewers, into this conversation so we can make it more fun and dynamic. James, what do you think? As a former pastor of very large congregations and now working in one of Australia's large Bible colleges, you'd have your finger on the pulse of exactly a lot of the concerns that the Religious Discrimination Bill is trying to address. Do you think we're going to have a situation that's better than the current status quo, or do we potentially risk creating a cudgel with which we will be bashed over the head with eventually?
Governments should stay out of telling people what they can and cannot say. The outrageous thing here is that you have unelected, unrepresentative bureaucrats who are able to tell you what you can or cannot say, but worse, they can tell you the way in which you are to or to not express your views. And it's just outrageous that you have, as I said, unelected, unrepresentative bureaucrats sitting in an office somewhere telling you what you may or may not say. You know, this was illustrated brilliantly during the Israel-Folau saga, and it wasn't given anywhere near as much attention as it should have been. But during that whole episode, one of Australia's human rights commissioners, Edward Santo, actually, through the media, offered to make himself available to Folau to, and I quote, help Folau better express his views. I mean, how thoughtful. You've got a public servant making himself available to help us better express our religious views. Here's a view. The Human Rights Commission should mind its own business. Now, maybe I could come with some help to better express that view, but it's outrageous that a Human Rights Commissioner deigns to tell us how we should express our religious views. What qualifies him to advise Israel Folau or me or you or anyone for that matter on how to express our views? The problem with these organisations is that increasingly dissenting voices need state permission to speak. And the moment we start going down that track, we are no longer talking about a free society, certainly not the Australia that we have known.
Yep. Now, I was interested in a tweet from you earlier today, James, where you said, I sometimes wonder if in today's politically correct Puritan culture, the ability to discern evil disguised as good is life's most important skill. You also wrote a recent article about field hospital being shut down, is your article, in New York City, which is probably the opposite. The Puritan political correct was discerning good as evil. Tell us a little bit about this incident, and maybe we can even start by reading this statement from the New York City Council's Speaker, Corey Johnson. He said, "It's time for Samaritan's Purse to leave New York City." And for those who don't know, Samaritan's Purse is a charity which was set up to inject much needed resources for rapid responses in crisis scenarios by the same person who set up World Vision. And the director who inherited the leadership of Samaritan's Purse is son of Billy Graham, Franklin Graham. So the speaker, Corey Johnson, goes on to say, this group is led by the notoriously bigoted, hate-spewing Franklin Graham, and came at a time when our city couldn't, in good conscience, turn away any offer of help. That time has passed. Their continued presence here is an affront to the values of inclusion and is painful for all New Yorkers who care deeply about the LGBTQIX plus community. James, overview. What's going on here?
Well, at the end of March, public officials invited Samaritan's Purse to come to New York to set up a field hospital to help relieve pressure from local hospitals that were inundated with COVID-19 patients. So Samaritan's Purse set up a 68-bed field hospital. They provided about 80 volunteers, trained doctors and nurses to care for those suffering from coronavirus who were unable to be helped because of the lack of state facilities. In just a couple of weeks, Samaritan's Purse gave medical care to hundreds of New Yorkers without reference to their ethnicity or their sexual orientation. The Speaker of the New York City Council, a gay man who prior to being elected to council was a gay activist, then came out and said, you know what, we don't need your help anymore, and we want you out of town because your volunteers have to subscribe to a Christian worldview. But you read his words. Let me repeat them. Listen to this. Let it sink in. He says, their continued presence here is an affront to our values of inclusion. Just think about that. Their continued presence is an affront to our values of inclusion. I mean, they are so inclusive, they had to get rid of the very people who were helping them.
Yeah.
What kind of mentality in the middle of a pandemic, your greatest priority is to shut down a hospital that is helping people, not because the doctors don't give the right care, but the doctors don't have the right opinions? That to me says the zealots are not the Christian workers providing the medical care. That the zealots here are the activists who care more about a doctor's ideology than they do about his ability to treat sick and suffering people.
That's anti-human, James. That is anti-human.
It is.
The whole philosophy that they approach is anti-human. But it gets worse, Dave. I mentioned to you earlier today about Tim Ball. In my opinion, the best climatologist, the best climate scientist in the world. I won't go into all the reasons, but I've had many dealings with him. He has faced many SLAP suits, SLAPP. I've forgotten what the acronym stands for. But they're basically false suits, much like Bernie is running up against. But he speaks his mind. He's got a lot of courage, just like Bernie. And he gets slapped with suits against him to shut him down. And they know that Tim is not loaded with money. And they're funded by billionaires themselves with vested interests. And so they do anything they can to shut down Tim with his honest approach to climate. And what I'm seeing now further, a couple of years ago, I listened to some lawyers from the so-called green side, and they said that their ultimate objective legally is to be able to represent nature. So the river would have a voice, the tree would have a voice, the mountain range would have a voice.
Wow.
Now, all they're trying to do is to shut down all dissent and impose their control. It is a way of manufacturing their control. And so what we need to do is to get back to a common law approach. We're bogged down in statutes, and every time someone introduces a regulation, it means there's a way of getting around that regulation. So there's another regulation. Next thing, we just have regulations growing and growing and growing. And then you get distortions, much the same as all three people and yourself, Dave, have discussed. We need to get back to common law instead of statutes. And this is a very simple way of instilling the same thing that the rifle and the jackboot have done over the centuries. The rifle and the jackboot are quite easy to see. Everyone knows someone is coming to control us. But this, you can't see. It becomes hard for Bernie to publicize this and get people to see it. It becomes hard for Tim Ball to do it. It becomes hard for James to do it. So this is insidious. It's much, much more threatening than a rifle, jackboot, and a set of tanks driving down the street. Much more insidious. But our whole way of life is at threatened.
What we've seen with this green lawfare in particular, and it's just another type of weaponization by the Marxist left of good law against good people. They've weaponized it and turned it against the citizens it was designed to protect. And one of the side effects of green lawfare is the sovereign risk that it creates, that there's a whole lot of development and infrastructure planning and foreign investment, which is actually a necessary thing for the growth of a country to get money from overseas. But who would invest in Australian resources and Australian infrastructure, which creates Australian jobs and boosts Australian economies, when they don't know the viability of any project, given how freely we let our courts be hijacked by these extreme radical fringe agendas? Marcus.
Yeah, about the Samaritan Purse, this gets me really worked up because, they say that the gay activists and LGBTIQ activists and pro-inclusive, they say they're tolerant, and yet in the middle of a pandemic, they shoo away Samaritan's Purse because Samaritan's Purse, because Franklin Graham is he's a Christian, isn't he? He's a Christian, so I just want to get that right. He's a Christian,
yes.
So and they shoo him away. And I remember writing articles on Israel Folau, my blog, and the incredible sheer intolerance from these people who are supposedly tolerant and inclusive, and they're not. And it's this arrogant form of domination that the left wants to dominate control of speech and language and the way you act and think. And, they go after Christians and they go after Catholics. And now, recently in Canada, they have these eco-socialists who are stopping these trains from running, these coal trains, and they're stopping these economic development projects, stopping tens of billions of dollars, stopping thousands of jobs to get into Canadians and Albertans, because they don't want these projects to go ahead because of climate change, the environment, the planet. We saw that with Adani here in Australia. They tried to stop Adani, took an election defeat for the Labour Party, for Queensland Labour government, to say, oh, we really do need Adani, otherwise they get smashed in the state election. It really concerns me. It's like, okay, then what's the point of getting to build a mine, a dam, or what's the point of being a Christian and speaking out in public square if the left is going to shut us down? And I don't feel like the right has fought back enough. I think we've been too complacent, and we've only just started to realize that the left wants to come after us because they want to dominate. That's the whole point, is to dominate. They want to get rid of us and our free speech. And that concerns me as a young conservative. We see it in universities, we've seen it in all sorts of places, in media and all that. And it's like, okay, what's the point of being a conservative if that's going to be my future, being dragged to court, being shut down, being bankrupted and all that? And that's the concerning thing. And if Australia doesn't stand up and speak up against this, then we're going to see more cases like Israel Folau, like Samaritan's Purse. We're going to see more of that unless we do something about it. And I don't think it requires government legislation. We just need to defend the freedoms we have. So, yeah.
Dave, the interesting thing about this whole debate about speech is that the people who are trying to control speech don't really care about speech. They care about power. And I think Malcolm's comment earlier illustrates this wonderfully, where certain groups say, the animals need a voice. And it's funny how the people who believe the animals need a voice always nominate themselves to be that voice, as if somehow they are able to divine the inner thoughts of animals. And they can't. And I'll prove it to you. Because if you were going to speak to the animals, you would think the animals would say, put me in a zoo. I'll get 3 meals a day, shelter, medical care, be protected from all predators. But the animals never say that. The animals always say, stop development. Stop development. It's amazing how when the animals are given a voice, all they care about is stopping development. Who would have known that was what the animals were thinking? Of course, that's not what the animals were thinking, because it's not about giving animals a voice, because animals aren't self-aware. The people who want to legislate speech are really just trying to grab power under the guise of caring about speech.
Yeah, absolutely. Bernie, have you got any thoughts to add to that?
I've always got thoughts, Dave. Look, I just wanted to go back to something Malcolm said about legislation, and we touched briefly on the Religious Discrimination Act, which has been, or bill, which has been put into federal parliament. And I just want to make this point because I'm fiercely opposed to that bill. I hope it never gets passed. The last thing I would ever want to do is give the Human Rights Commission power over my religious beliefs. But I can tell you one thing that has not been thought about are the ramifications that will come from this bill. For instance, one of the first things that will happen, I have no doubt, is that there will be court cases brought to change the rank slides of the Australian Army because they've got crosses on them, and there were people who want to use the Religious Discrimination Bill, if it becomes law, to remove those crosses. We'll have court cases over whether we can have public holidays at Easter and Christmas because they are Christian, and people want to remove the Christian elements from our culture. So we don't need more legislation. We need to bulldoze these organisations, sow salt on the ground so that nothing ever grows there again, and keep them as a monument to the stupidity of our times. And just on the Samaritan's Purse issue in New York, unfortunately, this issue has occurred in Australia as well during this pandemic. So in late March, it might have been a little bit earlier, but just as the pandemic was breaking here, the Victorian Tribunal ruled that a doctor in Victoria could no longer practice as a doctor because of his views on abortion. I mean, it's just insanity. We're supposed to be looking for medical professionals to care for us, and we're telling doctors and nurses that they can't. They can't even practice because of their traditional Christian outlook on issues like morality. It's insanity. These people would rather see us die than have the incorrect views.
I'm aware of other cases at the moment being discussed that the targets are not yet willing or strategically able, really, to come out and publicly.
Yeah, I'm aware of others as well, Dave, but that
detail
case is public. Can't practice because of his views on abortion.
It's scary that one has happened. That a doctor who refuses to kill a living, innocent human is risking his entire career by saying what the physician's oath and Hippocratic oath have said for centuries and centuries. And it was clarified at the end of the atrocities of medical ethics, both in America and Germany in World War II and prior to. This is not ancient wisdom. This was only in the 1940s where we said never again. And it wasn't just limited to gas chambers. It was the entire concept of treating a living human as other than, less than, and dehumanizing what basic biology says is a living human exactly the same as you, and what basic religion says is a person made in the image of God. And yet we have in modern, advanced, enlightened, humanistic Australia, doctors losing their profession because they're refusing to do harm to one of their fellow citizens, born or not. It's atrocious. What's even more scary is that you and I know of multiple such complaints and jeopardies to caring medical professionals' careers.
Well, there's also another element too, a broader and bigger element, and that is the media, Bernie. How many journalists in this country report your position? And that's censorship.
Well,
control, and always beneath control there is fear. They're afraid of you.
Well, I'm going to be. Look, there is certainly a large element in the media who would be running stories all through the paper if I ended up losing. I've had 37 complaints now. I haven't lost a single case. And there's journalists out there who are just itching to write the stories that I've lost. But I can tell you that the journalists are frightened themselves as well. I know 4 outlets where journalists have been interested in running stories about my case with Gary Burns and the Anti-Discrimination Board, and they have been pulled due to legal concerns. So these journalists are afraid of being hit with the same type of case as I am. And they're being silenced through the chilling effects of groups like the Anti-Discrimination Board. We have a distorted media partly because of bias. We have a distorted media also because they're afraid as well.
That's exactly right. I personally know a fairly high-profile journalist with a major network in Australia who was trying to report on a government inquiry into babies that were born alive because an abortion had failed. And he tried to report this and told me that he found it almost impossible to get the story published because the editors just wanted nothing at all to do with it. There are good people in the media who are blocked at every turn from reporting important things that are happening because of an ideological bias within editorial.
Dave, there's someone there called Eli Wintercross, and he's saying that is why conservatives need to stop letting the left make the rules, need to stop being afraid of offending people and just speak truth. Well, to Eli, that's a wonderful sentiment, but the problem is that the left has moved into the right. The so-called Liberal Party is partly left. Many parties are partly left, and so we've got this in the university field. We've got education infiltrated by the left. We've got so many institutions at so many levels who are now pandering to the left. So there are very few voices on the right who can speak, but those who can should be doing more of it. It's just very, very insidious what they're doing. We can see the jackboot kicking Bernie, but we can't see the left strangling him and choking him, suffocating him.
Yeah, well, Malcolm, just on that point, I think Marcus mentioned earlier or said earlier that, you know, the Conservatives are in charge in New South Wales, which they are, the Liberal Party is. And what are they doing about these laws? Well, they've actually passed laws to help the complainants.
That's my point.
It's taken one man who's not even in the Liberal Party, Mark Latham, to put a bill into Parliament, which I'm very, very grateful for. The Liberal, even the Conservatives inside the Liberal Party are helpless. I feel like they themselves don't even know how to start going about this, and we need to get a Conservative element in Parliament that is proud and happy to repeal some of these laws once they get into power. It almost feels like we campaign like losers in a way on the right, because the Conservative Liberal Party will get elected, but they won't dare repeal any of the laws that the left have put in previously. They just normalise them because they do nothing about them.
Well, quite often, Bernie, it goes even further. The Liberals come in, Liberals introduce something because of pressure from the left, and then it's blown out of the water by the Labor Party and the Greens to take it to further extremes. You look at the renewable energy target, for example, the stealing of property, of land use rights for farmers, initiated by the Liberals, but blown out of the water by the Labor Party and the Greens. And you're so correct.
Yeah, well, let's see what the Greens and Labor do with the religious discrimination bill when that one comes up for.
I think what we need to do is we really need to start encouraging actual principled mainstream everyday conservatives, Australians, good decent Australians, into Parliament. And I think the main problem is the moderate faction within the Liberal Party has such a strong grip because Vera Chicklin is their puppet, and they have Dom Harwin, they have Matt Keane. They're all in the Liberal Party. They have such an ugly grip on the party. I know because I talked to lots of New South Wales Liberal conservative, actual conservatives on Twitter. And so they're frustrated with this ugly moderate grip on the party. And I think we don't encourage enough conservatives to get into Parliament. There are some good and decent conservatives in the Liberal Party, but unfortunately they're being squashed by the moderates. We need to get more decent conservatives into Parliament and into the Liberal Party. Otherwise, if they keep going, and as a Liberal Party supporter, this angers me. If they keep going further and further to the left, the only way they're going to get pulled back is if they have like Cory Bernardi or Pauline Hanson pulling them back. That shouldn't be the case. That should be on the right. And so we need to start encouraging more conservatives into the party. But it's the ugly moderate grip on the party that is the real cancer. And if you don't get rid of that, you're just going to have more of this so-called conservative liberal leadership, which is disappointing because, as conservatives, it feels like, well, what other parties do we have? Like, what are we going to do? We can't campaign for Labour. We hate the Greens. What else are we going to do? It just makes our conservatives feel hopeless. And yeah, We really need to
Grady,
kick out the left. Yeah.
Grady asked the question. We know how do we turn the pressure up? Well, one is we support people like Dave Pellowe to give voice to people like Bernie, and we speak up when we have that opportunity. And we speak up without that opportunity. We create opportunities for ourselves, which is what Pauline and I try to do. The other thing is we vote differently. If you want to send the Liberals a message, vote for another party and put Liberal too if you want. But you've got to stop automatically voting Liberals, because when you vote Liberal, you quite often get Labor. I could go into that in more detail, but that's the craziness of it. And we've got to get Liberals standing up in their branches, because the person who seems to control the New South Wales Party and much of the Australian Party is a fellow called Photius.
Yeah,
and he gets a huge say. So we've got to be careful.
Gents, I'm going to jump in there and just put a little ad. We're going to wrap up this live stream in under an hour from the beginning, not from now. So we'll be wrapping up in about 10 minutes. We've got one more topic to move to before we do that. But the good news is we're not going to say goodnight. We're going to simply move to another video, another live stream, just to try and keep this under an hour and encourage more viewers for tomorrow. So we're going to wrap the show up, keep it to an hour, but you don't have to go away. On YouTube and Facebook, another live stream will be appearing within 2 minutes, a very, very quick break. And then we'll be straight up again with another live stream, and we'll call that Pellowe Talk Live Overtime. We will get into maybe a little bit more of these nitty-gritty details and maybe some other topics. And just a quick promotion, if you want to follow more of Pellowe Talk generally, and thanks for the encouragement, Malcolm, the way to do it is to jump onto Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube and look for the user handle at Dave Pellowe. And you can also get more interviews and articles from my website at davepellowe.com. And don't forget where to find these guys, at mrobertsqld, at Bernard Gaynor, at A Stronger Oz, OZ, and at James Macpherson. That's where you can find all of these panelists tonight on Twitter. I need to say them, not just put them on the screen now, gents, because we're going to be duplicating this to the Pellowe Talk podcast, which is on all good podcast channels as well. So, yes, this is going to go far and wide. Well, let's move on to another topic, and that is Australia First. We've heard this very, very good policy, I think, being articulated. Penny Wong last night on Q&A. And a reminder for everyone, this show hashtag is hashtag not Q&A, as well as hashtag Pellowe Talk. And it's been a long time in the coming, and hopefully we can grow it a whole lot further. But first we had Christina Keneally, and then last night on Q&A we had Penny Wong espousing language which sounded to me like good old-fashioned, not extreme, center of the road nationalism. What should we be doing? Malcolm, maybe weave into this conversation. We'll start with you. Should Australia be interdependent with other nations in the world, or independent?
We should be independent and free. I gave you a link, perhaps you could post it. This is Rebuilding the Federation by Richard Court, who at the time of writing that was in 1994 was the Liberal Premier of Western Australia. And he explains in there some wonderful work, very short book, very loaded with facts. He explains how the Constitution has been bypassed and our sovereignty has been bypassed. The UN has done it, and with the help of the Liberal and Labor parties in particular. And they have destroyed our economic sovereignty through the Lima Agreement in 1975, which Whitlam's Labor government signed, and then it was ratified the following year by Whitlam's archenemy, Malcolm Fraser, and the Liberal Party when they were in government. And we've had a series of UN agreements, but more insidiously, we've had a series of UN protocols, agreements, declarations, and so on. And we've had UN policies implemented through the Parliament, often by regulation that bypasses Parliament. So we've lost our economic sovereignty, we've lost our governance, we've lost our sovereignty. Many of the decisions we see destroying our country and surrendering Australia are due to these very things from the UN, pushed by the Greens and implemented by the Labor and Liberal Party through government or through regulation, or sometimes just through funding. soft law, as they call it. So we have to recognize that we've lost our independence, and we've done it in the name of globalism, the mantra of interdependence. Doesn't that sound so cute and cuddly? Wonderful, warm, fuzzy stuff. Interdependence with everyone around the world. The problem is, if I'm interdependent with China, that means I'm dependent on them for some products. So we have to restore our manufacturing. We have to restore our mining sector. And I mean restore. It's doing well, but it could be doing far better. We have to get back to basics on agriculture, restore the land use rights to the farmers, which they paid for, which the Howard government stole from them. These are the basics. We have to improve our education, not only buy Australian, we have to educate Australian. We have to get back to the TAFE system, proper practical approach. We have to get back to apprenticeships. We have to get back to practical university studies that are geared for Australians, not for a foreign market. By all means, welcome the foreign students in up to a point, but make sure we gear our education for Australians, and we have to govern for Australia. So it's buy, educate, and govern for Australia, not just buy. We have to get that done, first of all, by creating the business environment, by restoring governance that focuses on looking after Australia first. That means governance for Australia first.
Yeah. James, have you got some quick thoughts on independence versus national interdependence?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different view to Malcolm. I think we must be interdependent in today's world. I don't think it's possible to completely rope yourself off and become entirely independent. We've got to be interdependent, but maybe we should just be more picky about our friends. We have become interdependent with China, ignoring their communism because they make very cheap televisions. That's a big mistake. But there's this thing called the Anglosphere, which is not very cool to talk about anymore, but Australia, America, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, we have shared values, we have common culture. We need to be interdependent with like-minded countries. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that is to our advantage and will be a help to the world. We need to be interdependent, but a lot more choosy about what we cuddle up to.
Yeah. Marcus, what do you think about our Near Eastern neighbours, Indonesia, Singapore, some of the Taiwan, some of the other Asian partners with significant populations and economies we could be trading with?
I'm actually someone who recently wrote an article calling for Australia to back Taiwan and to have an embassy in Taipei. But I think we should diversify our trading alliance. We should be with India. We shouldn't be with China. Now you see them trying to close us economically because we want a inquiry to where the virus came from. So we might as well cut the trading agreement that we have a trade with, go and have a trade with India. We need to, the reason why we can't recognize Taiwan is because we have a diplomatic tie with China. And it says one China policy, you can only recognize China, but you can't recognize Taiwan. And we're polar opposite to communist China. We need to diversify our trading market, go with India, recognize Taiwan. But I think that we really need to look at what we are doing with things like the Paris Agreement and all that. We need to cut away from the Paris Agreement. We really need to go back to economic sovereignty. There's definitely lots of things Australia can do. I don't think we are hopelessly doomed. The problems are there. We just need to look at it and we need to fix the problem. I think the biggest problem is we have high immigration, which is why I agree with Christina Keneally that they're all saying it's xenophobic and going back to the xenophobic racist turn. I don't think it is. The Labour Party should be standing up and the Liberal Party and say we need to have an immigration program. It doesn't just satisfy the big Australian advocates of the Treasury, just prop up the budget bottom line, because immigration is important to Australia. I'm a migrant, but I don't want to see higher immigration that doesn't do well for Australia. That isn't the proper way to boost our economy. The proper way is to have low immigration, to have high wages and to bring back a manufacturing industry. So look at what President Trump has done. He's cut taxes, he's cut away from the Paris Agreement, he's put America first, manufacturing is back in America, high employment, or before the pandemic, they were enjoying huge employment, women, Hispanic, Black Americans. All we have to do is just look at what Trump has done and replicate that in Australia, we have to do that. We don't need to attach ourselves to some global bodies. They're useless. But I believe we need to diversify our trading markets. Our reliance on China has not been very good. And as you've seen, they've nearly dominated the pharmaceutical supply chain, and they're trying to cause us from an economic standpoint. And they've even said that we're like a gum stick to their shoe in terms of our trading lines. If they're going to treat us like that, then we shouldn't have a relationship with China at all. Just get rid of China. I know the Liberals and Labour Party would be very, that it's time for them to stand up for Australian economic interests. I think Australia's going to become more aware. They're going to be demanding this. So I predict they're going to be demanding a heck lot of this. Because this COVID-19 pandemic has exposed just how dependent we've been on China, on the UN, on WHO, and we're not doomed. Come on, the problems are there, and we've just got to fix the problem, and we can return to a sovereign nation. That's what we are. That's what we are meant to be.
Yeah, agreed. All right, just a quick ad. We are about to wrap up this episode of Pellowe Talk Live with Malcolm Roberts, Bernard Gaynor, James Macpherson, and Marcus Fu. But coming up in the overtime show, 2 minutes after we finished this one, we're going to be talking about how do we get out of this lockdown, about the authoritarian overreach, where you're seeing 7 cops in close proximity to each other, not at all practicing physical distancing, hassling and harassing a homeless lady for the crime of sleeping on a park bench in the socialist state of Victoriastan. I personally had a police officer who I was liaising with for work reasons ask me to report people who were in public watching a sunset. Have we gone too far? And what about the economic damage that's all happening? That's coming up in Pellowe Talk Live overtime. Hashtag not Q&A. But Bernard, wrap up those thoughts for us on the conversation we just had and the hour, and we'll go around the screen and get final thoughts concluding this episode from everybody.
Well, I think that we rely far too much on the United Nations, or give them far too much power over what we choose to do here in Australia. So I'm all in favour of reducing the ability of the UN to tell us what to do. I think it would be a great idea to increase trading ties with India. I think it's a natural counterbalance to China over time, and we should be looking forward to building relationships with India. And yeah, I think COVID-19, I think everyone's screaming out for Australia to start rebuilding its manufacturing industry. And I know with the car industry, we've been told Australia's not big enough to produce their own cars anymore, but I think that's a lot of rubbish. If you look at our industry, it's thriving for decades when we had a much, much smaller population base. And there's no reason why we couldn't be making our own cars again, and other things as well. So that's just my short 30 seconds on that topic.
I've got some thoughts about why our car industry is not so viable for the manufacturers that we're here, but that's perhaps a subject for overtime. Marcus, 30 seconds, just wrapping up the hour for us. Your thoughts concluding the evening so far.
I'm actually been really glad that I've been part of this discussion. You know what? I hope that more young conservatives and more young pro-Australian conservatives will stand up and be inspired to speak up, because all the things that we talked about, especially the national sovereignty, economic sovereignty, were talking about their future and the future livelihood. So I hope that more of them come out and,
yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you for your voice on
about it. So that's my 30 seconds.
Thank you for your voice on Twitter. It makes it a slightly less toxic environment to be in every now and then. James, your thoughts wrapping up the evening.
We've talked a lot about the need for political change, but there's an old expression, you get the politicians you deserve. It's funny how the left complain that Donald Trump is so vulgar. Well, America was always going to have a vulgar president because the culture has been vulgar for decades. Politics is downstream of culture. If you want to change the country, don't start with the politicians. You've got to start with the culture. And
so
it's really important that as much as we give attention to the politics, it's alternate media such as yourself, Dave. It's people getting involved in different areas of culture that then set the tone that our politicians ultimately end up reflecting. I think the biggest change that can happen is as ordinary people, such as you and I, simply speak out when we see something that is plainly not right. There's a classic example of this today when the Department of Health in the UK made a report saying that they fear coronavirus may have a disproportionate impact on some ethnic groups and certain genders.
Now,
they didn't may have disproportionate effect on males. They said on certain genders. Now, we all know what they're saying. They're saying that there are a multiplicity of genders. But here's the problem. To accept that requires intellectual dishonesty and compulsory lying on a massive scale. We all have to pretend that makes perfect sense, and we have to lie about it as if we agree. And I think the culture changes when we stop telling lies and we simply speak the truth, whether it's to our children, whether it's to our workmates, whether it's on alternate media. And the more people who speak out, the easier it becomes to speak out until eventually, hopefully, we'll get the politicians that we really do deserve.
Yeah, indeed. Malcolm, what do you think, wrapping up the evening and the thoughts that you've heard so far? Those were great thoughts. Thank you, James.
Well, first of all, everyone's duty is to speak up, because that's how we're losing freedom, by just being silent on the right and the conservative side. Secondly, we need to value freedom and understand how it's being destroyed. We need to get back to basics. Marcus mentioned that Donald Trump is getting back to manufacturing in America. He's only doing that because he's fixing tax policies. He's fixing, above all, the energy policy. We've got the cheapest coal in the world, cheapest high-quality coal in the world. But when we use it, it's so loaded with taxes that it becomes the most expensive electricity in the world. That is insane. We've got to fix energy. We've got to exit the UN. And above all, voters have to exercise their power at the ballot box. We can't have more of the same. Yeah,
no, completely agree. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining Pellowe Talk live panel tonight. Hashtag it's not Q&A. And will you all be available for overtime in 2 minutes?
Yeah. Yes, mate, I will.
Yep, for a bit.
Yeah.
Awesome, great. Well, guys, check out YouTube and Facebook and /Dave Pellowe, facebook.com/Dave Pellowe, youtube.com/Dave Pellowe. In fact, it should be the channel you're already watching on, and we'll be right back in 2 minutes. We hope you stick around. But for this episode of Pellowe Talk, that's it. Thank you very much, and we will see you in the comments section.